Hello, everybody. Welcome to CMMC News for the Defense Industrial Base. We have a large group joining us today, so we're going to give everyone another minute to join. All right, looks like we have a good bit of people joining us. So before we get started, we have some housekeeping items. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We will answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions today, a KTO consultant will reach out to you. This webinar is being recorded. You will be sent a link to the recording after the webinar, as well as a PDF copy of the deck. Meet the speakers. Andrew Lally is our Director of IT, who will be available for Q&A at the end. David is one of our registered practitioners and senior account managers for aerospace and defense. And then myself, Disha Patel, I am also one of the registered practitioners here at KTL and an account manager for aerospace and defense. Our agenda today will cover a brief introduction of our services, followed by David going over the product placemat for CMMC, as well as the latest CMMC AB and DoD news. Afterwards, I will dive into KTL's new offers and services. KTL Solutions has been providing IT consulting to our Microsoft clients for over 20 years. As a Microsoft Gold partner across several practice areas, we help with everything from licensing, implementation, virtual infrastructure, to Dynamics consulting services. We knew our clients were going to need help with aligning to CMMC, so we entered the ecosystem early and made the commitment of becoming a registered practitioner organizations. A lot of clients really rely on our expertise as one of the first AOSG partners for government and moving from commercial to government cloud with Microsoft. With that said, I'm going to turn things over to David to discuss Microsoft's product placemat for CMMC.
Thank you, Disha. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to sit in our webinar today. Before I get into the changes from CMMC 1.0 to 2.0 that everybody's been talking about in the last few days, I'd like to take a second to point out an item from Microsoft's CMMC acceleration product, namely the Microsoft Product Placemat for CMMC. If you've used the placemat in the past, you're very familiar with the drop-down in the service pane, selecting various licensing types from the drop-down list and how it correlates to the specific CMMC controls. What some may not really realize is that you can also select the practices you can correlate those controls up to. So the placemat is still a viable and very useful tool. You can go from all practices and toggle this over to specifically the NIST 800-171 control family. So the placemat is very useful, helps you relate all the specific NIST controls under CMMC 2.0. This will remove the additional Delta 20 controls from the old 1.0 standard. Moving on to recent and more pressing news is the changes from 1.0 to 2.0 of CMMC. Last night, the AB had a town hall specifically discussing the changes to 2.0, and they were able to bring in a special guest from the DoD, namely Jesse Salazar, of the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Industrial Policy, David McCown, Deputy Chief Information Officer, and Buddy Dees, Director from the CMMC Program Management Office of the DoD, to discuss the changes in 2.0. So really, What's changed? Well, first and foremost is the content of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense Acquisition and Sustainment website. That's really where the CMMC is kept. There's a lot of useful information to the changes that we've pulled into the slides. The DoD provides the planning that everybody should take, that should be reviewed and bookmarked, and especially kept up to date of changes of CMMC in the coming months. Some of the information is pertaining to the why and, the reasoning around CMMC and what 2.0 is meant to accomplish. Really other sections will go into the actual changes to CMMC from 1.0 to 2.0. One of the most notable changes is the streamlining of levels from 5 to 3. Level 1 and parts of Level 2, as far as the defense industry base, will be allowed to perform annual self-assessments. So, and I repeat, those are annual self-assessments. So in Level 1 and parts of Level 2, it's no longer on a 3-year cycle. You will be on a 1-year cycle self-assessing, while applicable defense industry base in Level 2 will also need to be assessed by C3PAOs on a triannual basis, and Level 3 assessments will be performed specifically by the DIBCAC. In addition to the streamlining of the CMMC, the reintroduction of the POAMs into the process has been made. It is important to note that there is no guidance at this time as to what POAMs will be allowed to achieve certification and what the specific criteria for waivers will be for certain CMMC requirements. In 2.0, the additional 20 requirements, or the Delta 20 as they're known, are no longer applicable, and we're back to looking specifically at the NIST 800-171, which we'll get into a little later, later on down in the presentation. This news is, this change is great news for those looking to attain compliance, especially with Level 1 and applicable Level 2 defense industry base or DIB requirements, as it'll make their process a lot more cost attainable. Now I'm going to specify cost attainable, versus easy, because there's still some things to be looked at there. A certain subset of the Level 2 contractors that are managing information that is critical to national security will still need to seek out a C3PAO to perform their triennial assessment, with Level 3 being required to go to the DIBCAC for their assessment. Now, with the reintroduction of POAMs, the DIB can be awarded contracts now under 2.0 if they still have open POAMs. Okay, there is a caveat though that specific POAMs will not qualify for exceptions of award. The subset of POAMs that will fall in this category are yet to be clarified or determined. So keep an eye on the website from the DoD to kind of see when that information will be provided. Now, in addition to the changes, the DoD has laid out 5 steps in order to make your organization more secure against cyber threats. I mean, if they look familiar, it's really looking at the basic security hygiene at Level 1. Now, before I kick this back over to Disha to kind of wrap up, before we get into the QA section, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions, I do want to take a moment to go over some of the key takeaways. Now, during last night's webinar, it was clarified on the length of time that a POAM will be allowed to be open till it needs to be remedied. This is important. That time that was provided was 180 days. So when you start looking at this and start peeling back the onion and reading between the lines, this may mean that anybody that is self-assessing will need to resubmit to the SPURS once the POAM is closed. So albeit it's an annual self-assessment, within 6 months, you may be expected to resubmit to the SPURS to show evidence of your POAM being addressed. In addition, for the applicable Level 2 and Level 3, many may find that there will be a need for a Delta assessment to show that POAMs are closed. but this hasn't yet been said, but it is something to kind of keep in consideration. Just really keep your eyes on the DoD's website for the updated CMMC 2.0 documentation. It is anticipated to be available by the end of November based on Buddy D's comment during the town hall last night. The recording isn't available as of yet, but it should be shortly. So if you didn't have a chance to view that town hall last night or be on that town hall, it is advisable that you wait for the recording to be available and take a look at that information and really start to extrapolate some of the underlying items or tidbits of information that are going to be as far as things that you have to pay attention to. Albeit there is no more Delta 20s in the requirements anymore, so the additional 20 controls. But the caveat there is if changes are made to the NIST 800-171, it will be an important area to watch because it's specifically going to tie back to 2.0. And although level 1 and portions of level 2 are back to self-assessment, this shouldn't be looked at as a sure we got it done scenario. Be ready to defend your findings with fact-based evidence. Remember, the DOJ, they did announce that they are going to be going after the defense industry base in the event of breaches or whistleblowers. So you have to be in a defensible position. Take time to actually read the NIST 800-171 cover to cover. A lot of folks don't realize that in Appendix E, there's NFOs. Okay, since the 171 was pulled from 853, you'll want to look at the specific controls under 171 as they relate to the controls in 53 to see if the processes and policies that you have, they haven't gone away with CMMC 1.0 going to 2.0. They're still there. They're just implied. So when you look at the NFO controls in the Appendix E, you'll see that they reference that, policies and processes still need to be in place. More simple terms, you can provide evidence, you're going to need to be able to provide evidence that a control is being met, but you can't do that without the documentation or evidence of how that control is met. This input is just as important as the output. This was really hinted at during last night's town hall, especially when Buddy D's made the actual comment that DIB companies are going to have to have processes in place in order to put their practices in effect. Okay, so just because you have media protection covered, can you show that you have media protection covered? Just because you have access controls covered, can you show that you have access controls covered without policies and procedures? So although it's not specifically or explicitly defined in NIST 800-171, it is implied. So now I'm going to turn this over to Disha to kind of wrap up on our service offerings before we head into the Q&A. So with that said, we will spend a lot of time in Q&A because we know there's going to be a lot of questions. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Disha. Over to you, Disha.
Thanks, David. I'm going to go over some of KTL's offers and services now. So first, training. Training is extremely important, and with on-demand user training, it improves adoption. If users know how to use the tools they have, whether it's Teams, Outlook, SharePoint, they understand and know how to utilize those tools, it definitely improves adoption. And if they have a high level adoption, it drives acceleration and return on investment for the investments they are making in Microsoft 365. Here at KTL, we have two training options. The first training option we have is KTL eLearning, which is our self-service learning platform. There are a ton of benefits to this. There are training videos, full text search, improves knowledge retention, and reduces help desk calls. Users can go directly to the eLearning tool and search questions and watch the training videos to find their answers before reaching out to the IT team. There's roughly 5,000 task-based videos in the online library for the Microsoft stack. KTL e-learning is now available in Teams. It's a really simple deployment through the Teams admin process and by utilizing your M365 login credentials. The only thing is that GCC High customers must access this via the web since third-party apps are not currently permitted in the Teams app for GCC High right now. So then we have another training option, which is the training catalogs from Microsoft. As a top-tier Microsoft partner, as well as an AOSG partner, Microsoft has reached out to us so we can make these training catalogs available to our customers for free. It is training done by Microsoft representatives. If you reach out to your account manager at KTL, we can nominate you and put you in contact with one of the reps to begin your training program. It includes level 100 and 200 courses, and it's a really great offer. So if you're interested, just feel free to reach out. Aside from that, we have ongoing support for our clients through our managed services, KTL 360. For our GCC and GCC High customers that are looking to move forward with NIST and CMMC requirements, it is important to work with an MSP that is familiar with those requirements. At KTL, we have the roadmap in place to get ourselves CMMC and NIST 800 compliant. We already have an enclave for the support of our government clients. The Managed Workspace 360 is where we help you manage your endpoint devices and desktop units that your users are using. Managed Server 360 is where we are managing servers, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem. Managed DBA 360 is where we do a lot of the SQL and database management that is required. And then, of course, with Azure Sentinel, having a SIEM in place. You can have all of these, or you can just have one. It's an a la carte type of program that you would need to discuss with your account manager to determine what's best for you. If you want any more information on either of the training options we discussed, please reach out to your account manager or reach out to sales@ktlsolutions.com. All right, well, it looks like we have a couple questions that have came in, so we can go ahead and jump into Q&A. Let's see. First question, how do we know which level we are? David, would you like to take that question?
Sure, definitely. So pretty simple if you are just handling federal contract information, you're not actually touching CUI, you're definitely going to fall into that level 1 category. Now, as you start looking at touching CUI, that's where some of the clarification from the Department of Defense is going to come into on whether you fall into that definitive level 2 or potentially level 3. So if you're working with things like control technical information, in some regards ITAR, export control, there may be the potential that you could be in level 3. But there's also a good potential that you'll be level 2, but requiring to be assessed by C3PAO. You just have to really look at the criticality of the information that you are providing or services that you're providing to the Department of Defense and how that plays into the type of information that you're holding. If it's critical to the Department of Defense, chances are they're going to want a medium or high assurance that you are actually secure. If it's mission critical, you're definitely going to need that high assurance. So expect a call from the DIBCAC at that point. But in the meantime, there's no definition from the DoD on the split between self-assessing and needing a C3PAO at the level 2 requirements.
Great, thanks. Next question, can you give more details on assessments?
Now, are they asking the question in regards to looking at the assessment process, but you know what, I'll take it from the assessment process. That'll probably make a little bit more sense. So when you prepare for your assessment, one of the first things they're going to do is to validate or verify that you're actually ready for the assessment. So they're going to ask for your documentation. They're going to ask for your evidence and information to kind of make sure, are we going to, waste everybody's time, or are we going to be able to actually do the assessment? So you're going to need to provide them that evidence of being ready for that assessment. So you're going to be looking at your policies and procedures. You're going to be looking at your environment. And then they're going to take some time to actually go through that in order to make sure and validate that you are ready for that assessment. From that point, you're going to expect probably about a week, maybe 2 weeks worth of consulting services where they're going to go through and with a fine-tooth comb, and they're going to review your policies. They're going to validate that your practice is defined and that individuals that have that stakeholder requirement under that CUI area will be able to articulate those policies accurately, or that those controls are in place.
All right, great.
Anything you want to add to that, Andrew, or?
No, I think you kind of covered it pretty well there.
Okay.
Great. Are there different, next question, sorry. Are there different Microsoft licensing that we need with the CMMC changes?
Yeah, so for this question, not a whole lot has really changed in terms of what our recommended licensing is within GCC High or GCC, depending on which one you actually need. With the loss of the Delta 20 controls, there are some things that we had said you needed and pointed directly to those controls as it says you have to have this, and this is the feature and the license you need, and specifically the Defender for Office 365, Plan 1 or 2, the email sandboxing is kind of gone now. That doesn't mean we're not going to recommend it. That's a great security tool, and to not have it is a pretty big loss, and will allow probably a good bit of stuff to come through. But the basic Exchange does have kind of your normal spam filter, the antivirus, and all those things. And so our recommendation of kind of the base level licenses still would be really the M365 SKUs. And if you need all the features in E5, jump up there. If it's not within budget and you kind of piecemeal it, then you can go M365 E3, add on kind of the extra things, the Defender for Office 365, security packages, Defender for Endpoint, and those things that kind of round out the whole package to get what the E5 would have given you, and still be able to put a good security package around Office 365 and your endpoints. If you are one of those organizations that are going to have to go level 3, that's where we're going to have to wait and see exactly how they kind of divvy up the 172 requirements. Right now, it just says a subset of 800-172. That has a little more advanced things that weren't really covered in the CMMC side, and therefore more the 4 and 5 levels. So once we get some actual examples of that, we'll be able to kind of tailor recommendations for those specific customers. But right now, that one is kind of up in the air regarding what is going to be necessary depending on what controls are actually going to push down. But at this point, the same thing we've been recommending to customers. It's still a very well-rounded security program for your actual Office 365 and endpoints. So nothing really has changed as far as licensing goes.
Great, sounds good. Thank you, Andrew. Another question. How do I know if I need GCC or GCC High?
Yep, that's another big question and has huge ramifications on kind of how things work. And so even with CMMC 1.0, the actual driving factor that we were going in with customers of, do I need GCC, do I need GCC High, wasn't so much of you have a CMMC requirement. It's still more about what type of data you're holding. And so if you have just kind of FCI data, then yes, GCC may work. If you have some basic CUI, then yes, GCC High or GCC may work still. But kind of the biggest questions that kind of pushes people to GCC High right out the gate is, do I have specific data, expert controlled, something like that? Do I not know I have it and I might have it? then probably err on the side of caution? Or do you expect or could potentially bid on contracts that might have it? And so, yes, you might as well go there instead of putting yourself in a spot you have to move anyway. And so it's still kind of a inward look on what type of contracts you have, what type of data you may be receiving or creating, and that is going to determine not so much of what compliance framework you're going to need to implement in that environment, but rather what type of data you are working with.
Great, thank you, Andrew. It looks
Yeah,
like that.
I just wanted to add one other thing to what Andrew said with regards to the type of data. So, you know, as we know, there's only 3 levels now. If there's a chance that you're going to be in level 3 mission critical DoD information services, you definitely want to take a look at the 172, the enhancements. So, you know, some of those are going to be process oriented. Some of those are going to be technical controls. So it's one of those things that you should plan. Not necessarily going to say that you need to execute at this time till there's some clarifications from the DoD, but it's definitely something that you should look at and plan about, especially when you start looking at the, you know, not 2-factor authentication, but you know, a dual authorization of, you know, requirement, for instance, in the access controls. Really, what does that mean? Is that something that's technical, or is that something like, okay, I have to have 2 people involved in the process? I've heard it debated both ways. In my opinion, it's more of a kind of that mission silo that you have 2 people turning the keys, but also at the same time, it's, you know, they have to get the call from the White House for that authorization. So it's a process. So you want to look at those enhancements, and you really want to understand if that's where you're going to be at or think you're going to be at, what they actually mean as they relate to 172, as they relate to 171, sorry.
All right, thank you, David. It looks like that covers most of our questions. If you weren't able to ask a question and you have additional questions, just feel free to reach out to your account manager or sales@ktlsolutions.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. That concludes our webinar.